Hey everyone, today I've got a short video on the Lexicon PCM70, specifically the software versions that go along with it. So I've got my PCM70 here. I've done a couple videos on this among other PCM70s for some repairs which are kind of interesting. I'll link those videos below. But for this unit, I'm going to talk about software today. So as you can see, I've got version 2.0 of the software installed on here. There's some older versions. There was some version 1s. 1.2 was part of the very early runs of the unit. Then the 2.0 came out, and then later on the 3.1 version came out, which is the version 2 and the version 3 are the two versions I'm going to talk about today. So 2 is generally very well liked, and then 3.0 came out a little bit later, and it's very well liked too. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the differences between those two versions. So there's a lot of information out there, some confusion. Some threads that I've seen in the past, people got it right, but I just wanted to clarify some things about those two different software versions on this unit, talk about what the differences are, and just try some other tricks that I've read online of things I want to do as well. So while I have it on here on the bench before we take it away, version 2.0, so there's some not famous, but very, well, maybe famous, but some very well-liked presets. 3, Concert Hall is a very good one. 4, Rich Chamber. 5.0, Rich Plate. The way that these are set up too is that Lexicon breaks it up into rows and columns. So 3.0, which is row 3, column 0 is Concert Hall, column 1, row 3, column 1, Long Hall, etc. to Gymnasium. So it breaks it up in a matrix on there. So a lot of times you reference these, you do reference these presets by, the decimal, so 3.2. So next we will take the Lexicon out of the rack, I'll bring it over to the bench, and we will update the firmware on it. So here is the Lexicon PCM70 back on the bench. This was one of the units I repaired. This is my personal unit. I will link the video down below of the repair of this. I've done a couple repair videos on PCM70s, and they're always pretty interesting. Most of it's all just digital logic, standard 7400 TTL, so they're actually pretty fun to replace. This one did have a logic issue. I don't remember exactly what it was. Besides that, full cap replacement for all the digital audio, both the analog section, digital section. I've got a mixture of Panasonic and ELNA caps, depending on the roll of them. And really that's all. Battery was replaced. I mean, there's really not that much to these, which makes them really kind of a nice thing to work on. Anyway, I'll talk about some of the hardware real quick, just because it is pretty cool, and there's a lot of things going on in this unit in terms of the between the DSP and also just the control from the microprocessors going through here. So this is powered by two different Z80 microcontrollers or microprocessors. There's one here up front and one in the back. This is your master processor. This handles basically all the actual day-to-day operation of the unit. So it runs the front display, it does the scanning, it scans the matrix for the button in the front for the decoding of those, decodes the input, the rotary encoder. It handles all the MIDI communication. There's a watchdog timer in here and a low power watch as well, sensor detection circuit as well. So if anything happens to either the watchdog stops running or power drops down, it will actually stop the unit, shut it down. Ideally to prevent memory from getting corrupted. So that is the role of the primary processor. The secondary processor sits back here, and the sole purpose of this is basically to update the writable control store, which is basically the memory for is what they call in this unit the high-speed processor, your DSP section. So this basically what it does is it takes the algorithms that are in this ROM here. I'll talk about that in a second, along with whatever presets, which are actually up in this ROM, or in this RAM for that matter, in the master section here, and then it loads that information into the high-speed processor's memory, which are these 4 static RAM chips here. These are 1K or 4K by 8 static RAM, I believe. So this section here is your DSP section, or the high-speed processor as Lexicon calls it, and it's made up of a handful of chips in here. The big ones, you've got a couple of them. You've got your converter management unit, which actually is responsible for running the digital analog converter. There's a lot going on there too in terms of that. This whole section is also used for some of your analog digital conversion. You have your ARU, your arithmetic unit. This is your actual DSP. This does the math. And then you've got your memory management unit up here. This chip essentially drives the DRAM, which makes up the RAM for the actual DSP circuitry. Besides that, you have a handful of glue logic in here to make everything work. Then you have the writable control store. So what this is basically the memory that loads the opcodes into the high-speed processor for the algorithms that you're going to be running for whatever preset you happen to be selected from, the ROM, or in the case the RAM if you have custom presets up here. So in the basic operation of it, when you power it on and select a preset, master processor basically loads a preset and talks to the slave processor about it. And then the slave processor reads that preset, understands the parameters of it, and then loads the opcodes from memory, in this case, this Eeprom here, into the writable control store, into the RAM, at which point, once it's loaded, the high-speed operation, or the high-speed processor, is able to read that data out of RAM and actually run the algorithms to do the digital signal processing. So for the Eeprom upgrade on this unit, you've got 3 Eeproms. There's U62, which sits here, there's U67 right there, and then U95 back here. U62 is the main, basically, OS for the unit. Like I mentioned before, this processor handles all the operation of the unit, so this has basically all your text, and it runs the operating system to run the front panel, update the display, things like that. So that's what that Eeprom does, but this Eeprom also contains your presets. So the default presets that come with the version you have installed, in this case for me it's version 2.0, are on this Eeprom. This Eeprom back here is your algorithms. So all of your algorithms, there's other items in here too that help run the slave processor, but your algorithms live on this Eeprom back here. This third Eeprom is actually part of the writable control store, and it's actually just a small little one. It's a 27C64, so 64K by 8, so not a very big one compared to the 256 and 128 that those two are. This essentially just handles some address decoding and does some other things for the writable control store. As far as I know, there's not actually anything having to do with the algorithms on this unit in this Eeprom here, but it is required for functioning, basically. So I wanted to talk about the software just briefly for this. So if you watched my previous videos on the PCM70, you know that I was irritated that, or am irritated that basically people out there charge a premium for software for this, which is silly because they buy the Eeproms for a couple dollars a piece, burn the software, and then charge $30-40 bucks on eBay or other sources for the version 3 or version 2, whatever it is you happen to want on there. What's even funnier is people will have like original Eeproms like I do here with the stickers on it, and they're vintage and they want a premium for them, even though you probably never want an old version of these to buy, because Eeproms, they have a lifespan. They don't last forever. Eventually, due to bit rot and other types of things, they can go corrupt. So point of all this is a viewer reached out to me. His name is Ken, and basically said, hey, I like the videos. I bought the version 3.0 software. I haven't installed yet. Would you like it and to do a video on it and play with it in your unit? And I said, absolutely. I've wanted to get the 3.0, for a while. It just hasn't been high priority, but the fact that he was generous enough to send it to me, which is awesome. So thank you, Ken. Very appreciated there. So with this, you get the 3 Eeproms, as I mentioned. So U62, U67, U95. And these are actually newer Eeproms. Date codes on these are 58th week 1980, 3rd week 96, and I can't read that one, something 1990. So they're not brand new Eeproms, but the point is that they're freshly burnt. So he's just, whoever is selling these that he Ken had bought them for, it's just burning them and reselling them. So what I'm going to do is update my unit with the version 3 software, and then we will power it up and play with it and take a look at the differences. So a couple ways to remove these Eeproms. One thing I will note too is the earlier units actually had zip sockets, zero insertion force sockets that were in the locations of those 3 Eeproms, which are beautiful because it makes upgrading it really simple. You just basically unlock it, pull the old chip out, drop the new one in, lock it back in place, and you're good to go. Lexicon actually issued a service bulletin about these because they were getting problems in the units with erratic behavior and the units locking up and things like that. Because I don't know if the sockets they were using weren't high quality or vibration was a play in it or what, I don't know. But connections were becoming poor in these sockets on the units and causing issues. So Lexicon has issued a service bulletin to basically have whatever repair center pull the old zip socket out, replace it with a standard socket, and then all units moving forward had the standard sockets, which is fine. I just wanted to note it in case you happen to open yours and see the sockets are there. So to remove the chips, a couple ways of doing it. There's IC pullers that you can do to do it. I generally don't like these. I find I end up bending the pins more so than just using a little screwdriver. They make better versions of better versions than this piece of junk to pull chips out of sockets. Don't recommend. What I do recommend is just a standard small screwdriver, and really all you need to do is just get underneath the socket, just slowly twist on the socket itself and the chip, and it will slightly lift out. Like that. So I'm not worried about orientation of these or location, because again, they're all labeled for where they're supposed to live. Alright, some new Eeproms I'll put in place. So that's U95. Goes there. U67 goes here. I checked ahead of time to make sure these pins were straight too, which they were. So, and then U62. Even if you plug these in the wrong sockets, you're not going to hurt anything. The unit's just not going to work. If you plug them in backwards, orientation wrong, you can damage things. But if they're in the wrong spots, those CPUs are just going to load microcode that doesn't make any sense, and it's just going to crash. All right, so I've got all three replaced. We shall power it up. All right, so here is first power up of the PCM70 with version 3.01, and it powers right up. So it did a system reset because the firmware is different, and anything in memory at that point wouldn't match up in terms of presets or anything like that I had there. But I didn't have anything, so it didn't matter. So the good news is at least the firmware looks like it works. Which is good. So here's the important part about this video, and it really comes down to what is the difference between the two versions, version 3.1, which I now have installed, and version 2.0, which I had in here, and basically why would you want to upgrade? And it really comes down to a couple things. The first reason is because the algorithms that are included with 3.1, they added an additional one. So in 2.0 there were 7 algorithms, and in 3.1 they added an 8th algorithm, which is the inverse room algorithm. So because that algorithm is in the newer version, there's a lot more presets basically that are on the newer version as well with 3.1 that include, basically inverse algorithm type, room sounds and stuff like that. Number 2, there is some basically just firmware improvements to the operation of the unit. For the life of me, I can't find it, but somewhere at one point a couple years ago I saw a change log that described the differences between the version 2.0 and 3.1. And I remember in there, I actually don't remember everything that was in there. Some known things are there was MIDI improvements, there was a couple bug fixes, specifically what I don't remember, weird cases of logic where the unit could lock up, stuff like that. I mean, very obscure things though. I've never had this unit lock up, and it's generally not a known problem with these units. But there was a couple other small things in there too. But, I can't remember those because I've searched and I can't find that changelog, unfortunately. Finally, number 3, the presets. And this is really the reason why a lot of people are interested in the different versions, is because the presets changed between the two versions. So the version 2 presets, which I talked about earlier in the video, are pretty well liked and regarded as being really, really good. The version 3.1 presets are different. So they've pretty much replaced all the original 2.0 ones with new presets for version 3.1. And they're all different, and people that upgrade 3.1 are sad because they want their 2.0 presets. So there are some things you can do about that, and I will talk that here at the end of the video when I get this powered back up, including Sysex Dumps presets you can import and stuff like that. But for the most part, a lot of people that go to the 3.1 version, they do it because they want that inverse algorithm, and they want the bug fixes. Maybe you have the MIDI features that you need for this unit. But that's entirely on you. Now for the presets too, keep in mind they are just presets. Granted, Lexicon did a really good job with them, which is why they're so well liked, but if you have one of these units, you should be really going through and creating your own basically sound configurations and then saving them into the free blank spaces in the registers where you can put your own sounds. To do that too, one thing that makes it much easier is to get an MRC. So the MRCs basically are programmers that work with a handful of Lexicon gear, including the Lexicon PCM70. It's a very handy device. It allows you to, real time basically adjust a lot of the parameters of the sounds you would manually have to go through and kind of, it's cumbersome to do on the unit without the programmer. It's kind of just like, a cheap LARC that you would have with like the 224, but it works with the PCM70, and different firmware versions too allow it to work with different items too. You can get some that work with the LXP 15, the LXP1, a couple other units I believe as well. I'll have to look more into that, and I do plan on doing a video here in the near future for the MRC. Finally, again, since I now have the version 3.0 firmware, and I've talked about this in other videos, I will be uploading it to the website, dbwbp.com. I might have that wrong. I'll link it below. A man named Vincent runs it. He's got the best vintage Eeprom or firmware ROM library that I've ever seen, and it's all free. So I've uploaded a handful of stuff to that before. Now that I've got the 3.0, I will I'll upload that there so that it's available to anybody that wants it. So if you have an Eeprom programmer, just want to program your own, you'll now be able to do so because you'll be able to find it easily off his website. So I was curious to actually look at the firmware and all the different ROMs, the 3 ROMs inside the PCM70, and just see if there's any obvious differences in there. So the assembly on these is, based on the Z80, and there are disassemblers available for the Z80 to convert this, back to assembly. It doesn't really benefit anything looking at between the two in terms of, really understanding what's going, unless you're really an expert at Z80 assembly and, can walk through it and, verify everything. But the point of it is just looking to see how much is different between the two. And again, between all 3 ROMs, everything is pretty much identical, because obviously there's little differences. Everything's going to be really shifted offset in this file. But besides the text that shows up from things like the presets and, things like that in the file, which is based on, in your assembly, you've got the data blocks where you actually put, actual ASCII text, which is then read by the microprocessor to display. The rest of it ends up just being, gibberish in the file here, which is viewed in hex, and also I've got anything that shows up as ASCII in the right column between the two. So one thing I did notice looking at these ROMs is that, so I've got the PCM version 2 on the left and the VCM 70 version 3.1 on the right, is that all of the ROMs on this thing are like completely full. You can see on the left there, there's a handful of 20 rows there of however many bytes that are empty. But on the right, the version 3.1, I mean, it is completely full. There's 4, 8, 12, 16, 17, 18 bytes there that are actually empty, unused. So they squeezed every inch, every byte out of this ROM that they could for that 3.1 version, which is kind of interesting to see. Going up the file a little bit, you can see, where was it? It was around 490. Higher. Some preset names. Yeah, so here's actually on the power up versioning, you can see PCM70 version 2.0 and then PCM version 3.01 on the right there for the 2 versions. So this Eeprom is U95. This is the Eeprom that goes to the slave processor and actually says that up here at the top. And if you actually notice, it's the same version between both, 1.20, 1.20, even though the actual Eeproms themselves, have slightly different amount of data. Again, everything looks relatively similar when you disassemble it in terms of the actual instructions in the assembly. But because of offsets and things like that, the actual machine code here, looking at it raw, is going to be completely different. One thing I noticed is down toward the bottom of this file, you can see there's actually presets that are saved in here. So echo flange, stereo flange, double slap on the 2.0, same on the 3.1, chorus, power flange, voice combo, things like that. So I'm guessing that because, as I showed on the first master Eeprom processor Eeprom there, it was full. There was no more room. So I almost think that they stuck some of the presets in this secondary Eeprom for the slave processor, just because there wasn't any more room in the master processor Eeprom. As I showed before, those were completely full. So the data bus between the 2 processors is tied together, so you can move data easily back and forth between them. But I think that's what's going on here, which is kind of interesting. The last thing I found interesting was at the bottom here, there was this message, out to lunch 925. And then you see it over on the slave as well, or I'm sorry, in the version 3 ones as well, out to lunch, out to lunch, out to lunch. And then it says that's all, folks, on both of them, which is kind of funny. So possibly a little Easter egg there. I don't know if anybody's ever seen those messages show up on their PCM70 displays, or just a message somebody stuck, one of the engineers stuck in the firmware for whatever reason, inside joke, some project name, some internal development name, I don't know. It's interesting. It's in both, and I don't know why. So if anybody has any information on that, would love to hear it. So here is the unit with the 3.01 software back in the rack, and so it works. And I've been playing with a couple of 3.01 presets. Again, I haven't used them very much, but they are there. They're good. No comment on them as of yet. I need to spend some more time with them. But one of the things I want to talk about here that's also very important is the fact that people complain that they go into the 3.01 version, they lose their 2.0 presets. Well, there's a solution for that. There is Sysex Dumps available, where people have taken all the 2.0 presets out of the PCM70, downloaded them to Sysex, and what they've done is they've reordered them, basically as the Sysex file available, so that you can re-import them back into your registers on the PCM70. So the PCM70 has 50 available registers for custom sounds, basically, where you would put all of your actual, programs and custom, profiles and settings into there for the settings you make and want to save. So the Sysex dump you take and you dump into the PCM70, and with that you actually get all of the original presets from the PCM70 version 2.0 software on your unit alongside all of the 3.1 presets. And again, this works because the algorithms are completely identical between the two versions. There's no difference. So the only difference is that on the 3.1 you have that extra inverse algorithm, which none of the 2.0 presets use anyway. So going through, you see I've got all of the actual original PCM 2.0, or I'm sorry, Lexicon version 2.0 presets in there. There's still a couple ones that are unavailable or not being used. So Rich Chamber, one of the very popular ones that's liked, going through. Gymnasium, long hall, concert hall. So they're out of order from the locations that you would usually use to see them be in, because they're in the registers and they're all pretty much sequential through there. But they are all there. Going back to the version, to the program itself, you can see, I still have all of those presets in, and then I can go to the register and load up whichever one I want. Small room load, and now I've got small room loaded in place on the PCM70 version 3.1 software. Now, a second catch to that is, some people don't know this, but another thing you can do, if you have the 2.0 software installed on your Lexicon PCM70, and you want the 3.1 presets, what you can do is you can download, there's a Sysex dump also for the 3.1 presets, all reordered to fit in the 50 registers, with the inverse algorithm presets removed. So what that means is you can take all the 3.1 presets, put it into your PCM70 2.0 software, and then have the same best of both worlds. So all of the presets available that you would have on the version 3.1 software, with exception just you won't have those inverse room presets because the algorithm doesn't exist in that version of software. The display on my PCM70 looks terrible on camera. It actually doesn't look that bad in real life. There's just like a little bit of scuffing on it that won't come out, because this is actually, I believe, really hard plastic, but I don't know, just a note. Anyway, I did want to note one thing on my PCM70 with the 3.1 software, with the 2.0 presets on there. Once I had everything loaded, both the Rich Chamber and the Concert Hall, two of my favorite presets on the 2.0 version software, weren't working. So I was scratching my head over this for a while. I reset the unit a couple times, hard reset it, cleared the memory. I redumped the Sysex data onto it a couple more times, and I was still having the same problem where, when the mix was basically 100% wet, you would get zero sound, zero effect through the actual unit. So just going through the preset, or the parameters for each preset, I discovered that in parameter 0.1, FX adjust, this is your FX basically output in terms of dB. These were set like all the way down somewhere in there, like as far as it will go. And that's why I wasn't hearing anything on the output. So once I brought these up to a reasonable level, matching that to the bypass audio, so that when you hit bypass it's the same level going through, everything was working fine. So I don't know if the data in the Sysex dumps is just wrong, or what's going on there, but that is how it is on the Sysex data that I'm linking below in the description or in the comments. So if you see that with yours after you load the 2.0 presets into your 3.1 software, just be aware that that parameter may need to be adjusted. Okay, so the final question after all of this is, if you have the 2.0 software, should you update to the 3.1 version? It really comes down to just two things, I think. Number one, do you care about the inverse room algorithms? If you don't, you probably don't need to update. Number two, do you use MIDI extensively with your PCM70? If you don't, you probably don't need to update. Again, one of the features that I remember now is you can actually dump individual saved register presets that you have to via Sysex back to your computer or to whatever device you want. You can't do that with the 2.0 version. So if that is something that you want, maybe 3.1 is worth upgrading and going through that process. But honestly, looking at these two different versions and showing that, again, the algorithms are completely identical between the two versions, minus the fact that, you don't have the inverse algorithm on the 2.0 version, and the presets are different, but it doesn't matter because you can load the presets to either version. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter between the two versions. So for me, because I've already got the 3.1's version in here now, I'm just going to leave it. And I've got the 2.0 presets on, like I said. But it's not like there's any major reason why I'm going to stay on 3.1 versus 2.0. It's simply just because they're in there and I don't want to remove again. The sockets and these things, you really don't want to be constantly pulling the chips in and out. The sockets, are older and they can wear a little bit. So I'm just going to leave it as is. So hopefully this video is beneficial in terms of talking about the two different versions and talking a little bit more about the architecture of the PCM70. Both the PCM60 and 70 are my two favorite effects units. To me, for these vintage units and the cost you can get them for, they sound really, really good. So thank you for watching.